Chapter 1. The Foundation of True Wealth. Think about someone you probably know, maybe it is you, who works relentlessly. They wake up before the sun, commute in the dark, sacrifice their weekends, and pour every ounce of their energy into their job. Yet despite all this grinding effort, they constantly feel like they are falling behind. They are exhausted, stressed, and fundamentally trapped. The tragedy here is not a lack of effort. The tragedy is that they are playing the wrong game entirely. They have been taught to chase money when what they actually need to seek is wealth. To transform your life and step off the endless treadmill of survival, you must first understand the profound difference between wealth, money, and status. Money is simply the way we transfer value. It is a social credit, an IOU from society that says you did something valuable in the past, so you are owed something in the future. Status, on the other hand, is an ancient, deeply wired game of social hierarchy. It is a zero-sum game. For you to move up in status, someone else must be pushed down. You see this everywhere, from corporate politics to neighborhood gossip. People who are secretly afraid they cannot build value often attack those who do, hoping to raise their own social status by tearing others down. To find true freedom, you must completely ignore the noise of the status game. Wealth is an entirely different concept. Wealth is the collection of assets that earn for you while you are sleeping. Wealth is the computer program running flawlessly in the middle of the night, serving thousands of customers while your eyes are closed. Wealth is the automated factory, the investment portfolio, the franchise business. If you are renting out your time for an hourly wage or a yearly salary, you will never achieve true financial freedom. When you go on vacation, your earning stops. When you need to sleep, your earning stops. Your inputs are tightly bound to your outputs. The foundation of true wealth begins with the realization that your ultimate goal is to decouple your time from your ability to earn. Society is a living, breathing entity, and it will always pay you for giving it what it wants but does not yet know how to get. If society already knew how to easily get what it wanted, it would not need you. The things we now take for granted, smartphones, air travel, indoor plumbing, were all once technological mysteries that society deeply desired. Your mission is to discover what people naturally crave and then figure out how to provide it to them at a massive scale. But you cannot do this by learning a generic skill from a standard textbook. If society can easily train you to do a job, it can easily train someone else to replace you. And if you can be easily replaced, society does not have to pay you very much. To become truly irreplaceable, you must arm yourself with specific knowledge. Specific knowledge is not something you receive in a classroom or a corporate training seminar. It is the unique accumulation of your native talents, your genuine curiosities, and your lifelong obsessions. It is the thing you did effortlessly as a teenager, the topic you cannot stop reading about, the skill that feels so natural to you that you hardly even consider it a skill at all. Consider the story of a young woman who grew up completely obsessed with the tiny, intricate mechanics of old clockwork. While other children were playing outside, she was sitting at a workbench with a magnifying glass, taking apart broken pocket watches and putting them back together just to understand how the microscopic gears transferred energy. She did not go to a traditional school for this. She just followed her innate, relentless curiosity. Years later, when the medical field desperately needed someone to design the micromechanics for a revolutionary new surgical robot, they could not just hire a standard mechanical engineer. They needed someone with an intuitive, almost spiritual understanding of tiny moving parts. They found her. Because she was operating entirely within her specific knowledge, designing those surgical tools felt like pure play to her. It was a joy. But to the outside world, to the companies begging to pay her millions of dollars for her designs, it looked like grueling, highly complex work. When you pursue your genuine curiosity, you naturally develop skills that no one can compete with. No one can compete with you on being you. You escape the brutal trap of competition through pure authenticity. But building this knowledge requires you to become a perpetual learner. The world changes far too quickly for you to rely on a degree you earned a decade ago. You must build a rock-solid foundation of basic truths, simple mathematics, clear communication, logical reasoning, so that you are never intimidated by a new subject. You must be willing to walk into a library, pick up a book on a completely foreign concept, and teach yourself a new reality in a matter of months. Yet, having specific knowledge is not quite enough. To convert that knowledge into wealth, you must have the courage to step out of the shadows. You must take on accountability. Accountability is a terrifying concept for many people because it demands that you take business risks under your own name. We are biologically wired to fear public failure. The thought of stepping into the arena, attempting something bold, and failing in front of our peers sends our primal brains into a panic. Because of this fear, most people choose to hide. They hide inside large corporations, they hide behind team projects, and they hide behind their managers. They want the safety of a guaranteed paycheck without the risk of public exposure. Imagine a brilliant chef working in the back kitchen of a massive, crowded restaurant chain. This chef is pouring her soul into the food, creating magnificent flavors, but she is completely hidden from the world. If a dish is slightly overcooked, the restaurant absorbs the complaint. She is safe. But because she takes no public risk, she also captures none of the massive upside. When the food is recognized as extraordinary, the restaurant takes the glory, the profits, and the Michelin star. The chef simply receives her standard weekly paycheck. Now imagine that same chef finally decides to embrace accountability. She leaves the safety of the dark kitchen, borrows money, and puts her own name in glowing lights above the door of a new restaurant. She steps completely into the light. If the food is terrible, she cannot hide. The failure belongs entirely to her, and the financial ruin will be attached to her name. But society generously rewards those who are willing to bear this burden. Because she has taken on the risk and the accountability, she now owns the equity. When the restaurant becomes a massive success, the wealth generated belongs to her. People trust her. Investors want to hand her capital for her next venture. She has built a reputation that will compound for the rest of her life. Embracing accountability means you stop renting out your time and start demanding ownership. It means you stop copying others and start following your most profound intellectual curiosities. When you combine your highly specific, authentic knowledge with a fearless willingness to fail under your own name, you lay the unbreakable foundation for a life of true wealth and ultimate freedom. Chapter 2. The Mechanics of Leverage and Ownership. There is an invisible ceiling above the head of almost every working person on Earth, and it is built out of time. From a very young age, we are taught a simple, seemingly logical equation. If you want to make more money, you must work harder and work longer. We are taught to trade our hours for a paycheck. But there is a fatal flaw in this equation. You only have 24 hours in a day, and you must spend a significant portion of them sleeping, eating, and simply living. If your ability to earn is strictly tethered to your physical presence and the ticking of a clock, you will always hit a wall. You can be the most talented, highly paid specialist in the world, but if you do not own a piece of the business, your path to ultimate financial freedom is entirely blocked. To break through this ceiling, you must move from wage work to ownership. You must acquire equity. Equity simply means owning a piece of the upside. When you are a salaried employee, the person or institution paying you is taking on the risk, organizing the resources, and holding the accountability. In exchange, they pay you the bare minimum required to keep you producing. They are essentially buying your time at wholesale and selling the output of your time at retail. The gap between those two numbers is their wealth, not yours. To build true wealth, you must become the owner of the system itself. You want to possess assets that continue to crank out value, serve customers, and generate revenue while you are lying on a beach or asleep in your bed. Without ownership, the moment you stop moving, your financial momentum stops with you. But simply starting a business is not enough. You must understand the physics of scaling that business, and that requires mastering the concept of leverage. For most of human history, if you were chopping wood or carrying water, your output was perfectly equal to your input. 1 hour of effort equaled 1 hour of results. Leverage is the magic that disconnects your inputs from your outputs. It is the force multiplier that allows 1 hour of your effort to produce 1,000 hours of results. To understand how this evolution works, imagine a young man working in the vast agricultural fields of a commercial farm. He is harvesting fruit by hand. This is a life of zero leverage. His hands are bruised, his back aches, and he is paid a small hourly wage. He is physically exhausted, and his earning power is strictly limited by how fast his hands can move before the sun goes down. Eventually, he realizes he cannot harvest enough fruit on his own to truly change his life. So, he steps up to the first tier of leverage, human labor. He saves a little money, becomes a contractor, and hires a crew of 50 men to harvest the fields for him. He pays them an hourly wage and keeps a small percentage of the profit from their collective output. He is now leveraged. He is earning from the labor of 50 people. But this is the oldest and most difficult form of leverage in human history. Managing human beings is messy, chaotic, and fraught with conflict. People get tired, they complain, they make mistakes, and they require constant, exhausting leadership. It is a step forward, but it is a heavy, grinding way to build wealth. Seeking a better way, he discovers the second tier of leverage, capital. He goes to a bank, presents a brilliant business plan, and borrows millions of dollars to purchase the farmland and a fleet of massive automated harvesting machines. Capital is an incredible force multiplier. It scales beautifully. Managing money and machines is far easier than managing hundreds of tired laborers. With capital leverage, he becomes incredibly wealthy. However, this form of leverage still has a catch. Capital requires permission. Somebody, a banker, an investor, a wealthy partner, has to trust you enough to hand you the money. You have to ask for it, and they have the power to say no. Then we arrive at the modern miracle, the ultimate, most democratic form of leverage ever discovered by humanity. Imagine a different scenario. Instead of working in the fields, a quiet, curious software developer sits in her bedroom with a cheap laptop. She writes a piece of code that uses satellite imagery and artificial intelligence to perfectly optimize crop watering and harvesting times for farmers across the globe. She finishes the code, uploads it to a server, and goes to sleep. This is the third tier of leverage, products with no marginal cost of replication, code and media. This is the leverage of the newly wealthy. When this developer wakes up, 10,000 farmers on 3 different continents have downloaded her software, paying her a monthly fee. It cost her nothing to produce the second copy of her software, or the 1,000th, or the 1,000,000th. She did not have to ask a bank for money. She did not have to hire a crew of laborers. She just used her specific knowledge to build a product that society deeply wanted. She has an army of invisible robots packed efficiently into server farms, quietly working for her around the clock. This is permissionless leverage, and it is the most powerful wealth creation tool in human history. In an age of infinite leverage, the old metric of hard work becomes largely irrelevant. If you are a heavily leveraged worker, the direction you are walking is infinitely more important than how fast you are walking. If you have an army of software robots magnifying your actions 1,000,000 times over, a single mistake in direction will lead to a catastrophe of massive proportions. Conversely, a brilliant decision will generate astronomical value. This brings us to the ultimate goal of your professional life. You want to be paid purely for your judgment. You want to reach a point where you are no longer valued for how many hours you sit at a desk, or how many lines of code you write, or how many meetings you attend. You want to be compensated because you possess a unique, incredibly accurate map of reality. Think of a person steering a massive commercial supertanker carrying billions of dollars in cargo. Nobody cares how early that captain woke up. Nobody cares if the captain is sweating or physically exhausted. They only care about one thing. Does the captain know exactly when and where to turn the wheel to avoid the hidden reefs and safely reach the harbor? If one captain is right 85% of the time, and another is right only 75% of the time, the market will gladly pay the first captain millions of dollars more. The value of that 10% difference in judgment, when magnified by the leverage of a massive ship, is almost incalculable. When you combine specific knowledge with permissionless leverage and you embrace the accountability to stand behind your decisions, you naturally transition from a laborer to a leader. You stop frantically running on the treadmill of hourly wages, and you step back to observe the entire machine. By cultivating pristine judgment, you ensure that every ounce of effort you do expend is magnified perfectly, carrying you effortlessly toward the kind of wealth that cannot be washed away. Chapter 3. The Long Game of Success. There is a powerful mathematical concept that most people only ever apply to their bank accounts, completely missing the fact that it is the secret engine behind every great life. That concept is compound interest. We are taught that if you leave a little bit of money in an investment for a very long time, it slowly gathers momentum, stacking upon itself until it explodes into an avalanche of wealth. But this same exact force governs your relationships, your reputation, and your ultimate success. The people who truly win in life are the ones who figure out how to stop chasing quick payouts and instead dedicate themselves to playing long-term games with long-term people. Imagine a young, ambitious building contractor who has just secured his first major project. He is pouring the concrete foundation for a massive commercial building. Halfway through the pour, he realizes a slight miscalculation was made. It is a tiny error, one that the building inspectors might never catch, and one that the client would certainly never notice until decades later. Fixing it would require tearing up the work, eating a devastating financial loss, and severely delaying the project. The short-term player stays quiet, pockets his profit, and moves on to the next job, leaving a hidden flaw behind. But our contractor decides to play the long game. He calls the client, openly confesses the error, and tears up the foundation at his own agonizing expense. He loses a massive amount of money on that job and works exhausting hours to get the timeline back on track. In the short term, it looks like a catastrophic failure, but the client witnesses a level of absolute, uncompromising integrity they have never seen before. 10 years later, that client is developing a multi-billion-dollar skyline, and they do not even ask for other bids. They hand the entire project and a blank check directly to the contractor. His reputation compounded. By enduring short-term pain, he built a permanent fortress of trust. When you surround yourself with brilliant, high-energy people of absolute integrity and you fiercely protect your shared trust over decades, negotiations disappear. Friction evaporates. You achieve massive things simply because you know you can rely on each other completely. To survive long enough to see these long-term games pay off, you must ruthlessly protect your most perishable asset, your time. You only have a finite number of heartbeats on this earth, yet most people trade their hours for pennies. Think about a person who finally starts making a decent income, yet still spends 3 agonizing hours on the phone, listening to awful hold music, just to argue with a customer service representative over a $30 shipping fee. Their blood pressure rises, their afternoon is ruined, and their focus is shattered. By doing this, they are programming their own subconscious mind to believe that their time is inherently worthless. No one will ever value you more than you value yourself. You must set an aspirational, absurdly high hourly rate for your time and defend it with your life. If you decide your time is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars an hour, your entire reality shifts. Suddenly, arguing with the electrician or driving across town to return a broken blender is entirely out of the question. You learn to outsource the mundane. You buy your time back, not to sit around idly, but to clear your mental space so you can focus entirely on the few monumental decisions that will actually change the trajectory of your life. When you reclaim your time, you are finally free to dedicate it to the things that feel like play to you, but look like exhausting work to everyone else. The world is full of people forcing themselves to grind through careers they secretly hate, motivated only by the desire to win a status game and impress their neighbors. Because they do not genuinely love the work, they have to use sheer willpower to get through the day. Willpower is a battery, and it eventually drains. Now, contrast them with someone who is utterly obsessed with their craft. Picture a sound engineer sitting in a dimly lit studio at 3 in the morning. He has been tweaking the exact frequency of a single snare drum hit for 6 hours. His eyes are bloodshot, his coffee is cold, but he is smiling. He is not doing this because a boss told him to, or because he wants to be famous. He is doing it because he is fundamentally obsessed with the mathematics of sound. It is a puzzle he is desperate to solve. He is playing. If you try to compete with this person, you will be utterly destroyed. You cannot outwork someone who is not actually working. When you lean so heavily into your weird, unique, authentic obsessions that your work becomes indistinguishable from your play, you step completely outside the boundaries of normal competition. When you play these long-term games, protect your time, and obsessively follow your authentic interests, something fascinating begins to happen. The world starts calling you lucky, but they are misunderstanding the fundamental architecture of luck. There are different stages of luck in human life. The first is blind luck, where something entirely out of your control drops into your lap like a lottery ticket. The second is hustle luck, where you run around frantically, creating so much motion and shaking so many trees that eventually an apple falls and hits you on the head. The third is prepared luck, where you become so knowledgeable about your specific field that you can spot a unique opportunity a mile away, long before the untrained eye even knows it exists. But the fourth and ultimate form of luck is the one you actually want to build. This is where your character becomes your destiny. Imagine you have spent 20 years becoming the undisputed, absolute best deep-sea diver on the planet. You have trained in freezing waters, pushed your physical limits, and built a reputation of fearless competence. One day, thousands of miles away, an amateur explorer accidentally stumbles upon a sunken Spanish galleon filled with gold completely by chance. That explorer had blind luck, but the treasure is trapped in a treacherous underwater cave. They cannot reach it. They have no choice but to seek you out, knock on your door, and offer you half the gold simply to do what only you can do. You did not stumble into the treasure. Your uncompromising character and specific knowledge acted as a powerful magnet, pulling the luck of others directly to your doorstep. You built a destiny so dense that luck had nowhere else to go. Achieving this requires one final painful ingredient: radical patience. We live in a frantic world that demands immediate satisfaction, quick returns, and overnight success. But the universe is highly efficient, and it cannot be rushed. You must plant the seeds, water the soil, and then step back to let nature take its course. If you constantly dig up the seed to see if it is growing, you will kill the roots. You must be deeply impatient and urgent with your daily actions, executing your work with fire and precision. But you must be incredibly unconditionally patient with your results. If you are constantly checking the scoreboard, counting the days, and demanding your payout, your emotional endurance will snap long before the magic happens. Let go of the timeline. Commit to the mastery of the daily process. Treat the people around you with impeccable integrity, and let the sheer, unstoppable force of compound interest do the heavy lifting for the rest of your life. Chapter 4. The Art of Clear Thinking. There is a dangerous myth that permeates our culture, whispering that the ultimate secret to success is simply bleeding for your goals. We idolize the grind. We applaud the person who stays at the office until midnight, exhausted and hollow, substituting sheer forward motion for actual progress. But in an age where your actions can be magnified millions of times over by technology and capital, the sheer force of your effort is no longer the most important variable. What matters infinitely more than your speed is your direction. Imagine two explorers dropped into the edge of a massive, uncharted jungle, both tasked with finding a hidden, ancient city. The first explorer is obsessed with effort. He immediately unsheathes his machete and starts hacking wildly into the thickest, darkest wall of vines. He sweats, he bleeds, he works 18 hours a day, pushing his body to the absolute brink. He measures his success by how exhausted he feels when he collapses at night. The second explorer does not even unpack his machete. Instead, he spends 3 full days sitting quietly. He observes the flow of the rivers. He tracks the migration patterns of the birds. He climbs the tallest canopy tree he can find and spends hours simply looking at the horizon, mapping the terrain in his mind. The first explorer looks back and scoffs, calling him lazy. But on the 4th day, the second explorer climbs down, walks a short distance to a hidden, dry riverbed he spotted from above, and effortlessly strolls into the ancient city before sunset. The first explorer is still miles away, trapped in a swamp of his own making, hacking wildly at the dark. This is the profound difference between hard work and judgment. Wisdom is the ability to know the long-term consequences of your actions, but judgment is the rare ability to actively apply that wisdom to the chaotic problems of the real world. When you possess massive leverage, one correct decision can win the entire game. If you point your energy in the wrong direction, all the leverage in the world will only help you hit a brick wall faster. You must develop the patience and the discipline to climb the tree, observe the landscape, and make the pristine choice before you take a single step. To cultivate this kind of world-class judgment, you must become something far more valuable than simply being smart. You must become a clear thinker. Society often confuses complexity with intelligence. We listen to people who use elaborate jargon, dense academic theories, and tangled logic, and we assume they must be brilliant. But true brilliance is breathtakingly simple. If someone cannot explain a highly complex concept to a 12-year-old child in plain, ordinary language, they do not actually understand it themselves. They are merely memorizing words and hiding behind them. Think of a master mechanic diagnosing a violently shuddering car engine. A novice will immediately hook up expensive diagnostic computers, frantically flipping through technical manuals, throwing around complex mechanical theories to mask their confusion. The master mechanic walks up, places a hand on the hood, listens to the rhythm of the engine for 10 seconds, and tightens a single specific valve. The master does not need advanced theories because they have internalized the absolute bedrock fundamentals of combustion and pressure. The advanced concepts in any field are often just noise used to signal insider status. A clear thinker ignores the noise and anchors themselves entirely to the unshakable basics. But anchoring yourself to reality is incredibly difficult, and the primary obstacle standing in your way is not a lack of intelligence. It is your own ego. From the moment we are born, our environment begins constructing our identity. We bundle together our habits, our political beliefs, our social status, and our desires, and we call that bundle ourselves. The problem is that our ego acts as a heavy, distorted filter over our eyes. We desperately want the world to be a certain way, and that intense desire physically blinds us to the way the world actually is. Imagine a person who is deeply in love with a partner who treats them terribly. Every friend, every family member, every casual observer can clearly see that the relationship is toxic and destructive. The truth is painfully obvious to everyone standing on the outside, but the person inside the relationship cannot see it. Their desperate desire for a fairy tale romance, their deep wish for their partner to magically change into a better person, completely clouds their vision. They invent elaborate excuses for bad behavior. They weave a thick web of delusion to protect their ego from the humiliating truth that they have made a poor choice. Eventually, the delusion can no longer support its own weight. The relationship shatters, leaving the person in agonizing emotional pain. But that pain, that profound suffering, serves a beautiful and necessary purpose. Suffering is the exact moment when the delusion is finally pierced. It is the moment when your desires collide so violently with the real world that you are violently forced to wake up. When you are suffering, you are finally experiencing a moment of pure truth. You can no longer deny reality. If you want to make brilliant decisions without having to suffer first, you must learn to step outside of your own desires. You must shrink your ego to the size of a pebble. When you face a critical choice, whether to close a failing business, end a partnership, or change the trajectory of your life, your identity will scream at you to protect it. It will try to justify past mistakes. It will try to save face. You must discard that identity. You must learn to look at your own life with the cold, objective compassion of a stranger advising a friend. When your friend comes to you with a problem, the answer is usually obvious to you within seconds because you have no emotional desire tied to their outcome. You must treat yourself with that same objective clarity. Achieving this requires radical, uncompromising honesty, starting internally. You can never fool the world, but you are incredibly easy to fool. The moment you tell a small lie to protect your ego, you begin to disconnect from reality. You start believing your own narrative, drifting further and further away from the bedrock truth. Clear thinking demands that you stop asking whether you like or dislike a situation. The universe does not care about your preferences. Nature has no concept of fair or unfair, good or bad. It operates on an unbroken chain of cause and effect. You must train your mind to stop wishing for a different reality and simply ask, what actually is this? When you strip away your ego, deeply internalize the foundational basics of your craft, and commit to seeing the world exactly as it is, your decision-making transforms. You stop relying on the heavy, sluggish processing of your emotions and start relying on the sharp, surgical precision of your judgment. In the modern world, the difference between someone who makes the right decision 70% of the time and someone who makes the right decision 80% of the time is not a 10% difference in outcomes. Because of the sheer scale and leverage available today, that tiny margin of clarity translates into a completely different universe of success. The market will move mountains to reward the clear thinker. By taking the time to quiet your mind, shed your comforting delusions, and clearly survey the landscape, you guarantee that every ounce of effort you expend will carry you exactly where you want to go. Chapter 5. Expanding the Mind's Toolkit. Imagine trying to navigate a sprawling, ancient city in the pitch black of night with nothing but a single fading match to light your way. You can only see an inch in front of your face, reacting blindly to every wall you bump into and every stone you trip over. This is exactly what it is like to move through life relying solely on your own limited, specific experiences. The human brain is essentially a prediction machine, constantly trying to guess what will happen next based on what happened yesterday. But if your toolkit only consists of the specific situations you have personally lived through, your predictive power is incredibly weak. To illuminate the entire city, you need a different kind of light. You need to build a latticework of mental models. Mental models are the foundational blueprints of how the universe actually operates. They are the deep, underlying principles that govern human behavior, physics, economics, and nature. When you possess a rich collection of these models, you stop reacting to the chaotic surface of life and start seeing the hidden machinery moving underneath. Consider a concept from economics known as the principal-agent problem. If you do not deeply understand this invisible dynamic, you will constantly find yourself frustrated in your business and personal dealings. Imagine stepping into a bustling neighborhood bakery at 6 in the morning. The owner of the bakery, the principal, is obsessively adjusting the display cases, wiping a microscopic speck of flour off the counter, and greeting every single customer with warm, genuine eye contact. Her entire livelihood, her reputation, and her life savings are woven into the fabric of this shop. Now look at the teenager she hired to manage the cash register, the agent. The teenager is polite, but he is checking his phone under the counter and counting the minutes until his shift ends. He does not care if the display is perfectly symmetrical, because his hourly wage is exactly the same either way. This is the inescapable reality of human incentives. When you are the owner, you care infinitely because you capture the massive long-term upside and bear the catastrophic downside. When you are the agent acting on behalf of someone else, you naturally optimize for your own comfort and survival. The world is constantly trying to convince you that you need agents, managers, brokers, consultants to run your life. But to truly succeed, you must recognize this model everywhere. If you want a job done to perfection, you must either do it yourself, or you must structure the environment so that your agents are compensated exactly like owners, directly tying their reward to the exact value they create. As you collect these models, they become automatic filters for your daily decisions. Take the overwhelming paralysis of choice. We live in an unprecedented era of infinite options. For our ancient ancestors, choosing a partner meant selecting from the 3 available people in their small nomadic tribe. Choosing a career meant taking over the family trade. Today, you have access to a global population of billions and thousands of potential career paths. Our biology is simply not designed to process this volume of opportunity. Because of this, we often agonize over decisions, creating massive spreadsheets of pros and cons, trying to rationally weigh options that are fundamentally emotional. Here is a powerful mental model to shatter that paralysis. If you cannot decide, the answer is no. If you are standing at the precipice of a massive, life-altering commitment, moving to a new city, marrying a partner, entering a decade-long business venture, and you feel deeply torn, you must walk away. When you say yes to a monumental choice, you are locking yourself in for years, closing the door on countless other brilliant opportunities that might be waiting just around the corner. You should only surrender your freedom when you feel an absolute, undeniable certainty. Save your profound commitments for the rare moments when your entire being screams yes. Furthermore, when you do find yourself evenly split between 2 difficult paths, there is another simple heuristic you can apply immediately. Choose the path that requires more short-term pain. Your brain is biologically wired for comfort. It will always try to subconsciously steer you away from immediate suffering, even if that suffering leads to massive long-term gain. If 2 choices seem perfectly equal, it is almost guaranteed that one involves a quiet, comfortable stagnation, and the other involves the painful, terrifying friction of growth. By actively running uphill and leaning into the short-term pain, you cancel out your brain's evolutionary weakness and guarantee that you are compounding your future value. But how do you acquire this vast, invisible toolkit? How do you fill your mind with these timeless models? You must unlock the ultimate meta-skill of humanity, You must learn to love to read. The tragic reality is that the modern education system has completely destroyed the joy of reading for most adults. We are taught from a young age that books are homework. We are conditioned to believe that once you start a book, you have a solemn moral obligation to suffer through every single page until the end. Because of this, millions of people currently have a dense, highly acclaimed biography sitting on their nightstand, gathering dust. They bought it to feel smart or to impress their friends, but they secretly find it incredibly boring. They are stuck on page 40. Because they feel guilty about not finishing it, they refuse to start a new book. Their intellectual growth completely halts, barricaded by a single boring piece of paper. You must shatter this conditioning immediately. Treat books like a sprawling, fascinating cocktail party. You are not obligated to stand in the corner and listen to a boring guest for 3 hours. If a book does not captivate you in the first chapter, drop it without an ounce of guilt. Skim the pages. Read the ending first. Jump to the middle because a single paragraph caught your eye. Read what you genuinely love, even if it is cheap science fiction, comic books, or fantasy novels. Read what completely absorbs you until the sheer act of reading becomes an unbreakable, lifelong addiction. Once the habit is locked into your daily routine, your natural curiosity will inevitably mature. You will effortlessly drift toward history, philosophy, economics, and the hard sciences, not because you are forcing yourself, but because you possess a desperate, insatiable hunger to understand how the universe works. When you do begin to read for deep understanding, focus entirely on the bedrock foundations. Do not waste your time memorizing the fragile, highly complex theories at the bleeding edge of modern academia. Instead, master the unshakable basics. You do not need to understand advanced quantum mechanics, but you must deeply, intuitively understand basic arithmetic, probability, and statistics. You must understand the fundamental laws of supply and demand. Once your foundational knowledge is as solid as concrete, you will possess a quiet, unshakable confidence. No book in the library will ever intimidate you again, because you will always have the tools to construct your own understanding from the ground up. However, none of these mental models and none of this profound reading will do you any good if your mind is trapped inside a rigid cage of identity. From the moment we are born, we begin accumulating labels. We adopt the political beliefs of our parents, the dietary habits of our friends, and the professional titles of our industries. We carefully bundle these labels together and declare to the world, "This is who I am." But an identity is not a tool. It is a heavy suit of armor that prevents you from moving freely. The moment you adopt a strict label, whether you passionately identify as a political partisan, a hardcore minimalist, or a specific type of intellectual, you instantly turn off your ability to think independently. When you encounter new information that contradicts your deeply held label, your brain literally perceives it as a physical threat. Your heart rate elevates, your vision narrows, and you stop searching for the truth. You shift all of your intellectual energy into defending your tribe and protecting your ego. If all of your beliefs line up into neat, perfectly packaged bundles that exactly match the people around you, you should be highly suspicious. It means you are no longer thinking, you are simply mirroring. To absorb reality exactly as it is, you must fiercely resist the urge to self-identify. You must be willing to ruthlessly uncondition the habits and responses you have blindly inherited. An ancient proverb states that tension is who you think you should be, but relaxation is who you actually are. True intellectual freedom requires you to drop the heavy armor of your social labels. When you shed your identity, you stop trying to bend the external world to match your fragile ego. You step out of the dark, narrow alleys of tribal thinking, fully equipped with a toolkit of timeless models ready to navigate the breathtaking, infinite complexity of the real world. Chapter 6. The Architecture of Happiness. For most of our lives, we are fed a subtle but incredibly destructive lie about happiness. We are taught to view it as a stroke of genetic luck, a fleeting weather pattern that rolls into our minds and eventually rolls out, completely beyond our conscious control. We look at someone who radiates calm and joy, and we assume they were simply born with a lighter spirit, while we were dealt a heavier, more cynical hand. But what if happiness is not something you passively inherit, nor a lottery ticket you randomly scratch and win? What if happiness is a highly personal, deeply technical skill that can be learned, practiced, and mastered, exactly like lifting weights, eating nutritiously, or learning to play an instrument? Imagine someone who spends their entire 20s and 30s completely out of shape, chronically out of breath, and physically exhausted. They look in the mirror and falsely assume this is just their permanent, unavoidable reality. But one day, they make a choice. They walk into a gym. They start with incredibly light weights and short, agonizing runs. It is painful at first, but over months and years of relentless consistency, they systematically tear down their old, weak muscles and build entirely new, resilient tissue. Their physical baseline completely transforms. Your mind is just as malleable as your physical body. You can systematically uncondition your ingrained pessimism and actively recondition your mind to naturally default to peace. But this profound transformation cannot begin until you accept the absolute truth that happiness is a deliberate choice you make, followed by a rigorous skill you develop through daily practice. Before you can build this skill, however, you have to redefine what you are actually trying to achieve. When most people say they want to be happy, they are usually picturing a state of ecstatic, thrilling joy. But euphoric joy is an exhausting spike in emotion, and it is intrinsically tied to its opposite. Every intensely positive thought carries the hidden seed of a negative thought because it relies entirely on contrast. If you declare that you are thrilled because you are finally escaping to the beach for a vacation, you are simultaneously acknowledging that your normal daily life is something painful that you needed to flee from. True happiness is not about accumulating thrilling thoughts or chasing fleeting highs. It is about the absolute absence of desire. It is the quiet, perfect state that emerges when you completely remove the nagging sensation that something is missing from your life. Think of a young child completely engrossed in building a fortress out of wooden blocks on the living room floor. The child is not paralyzed with anxiety about a schedule they have to keep tomorrow. They are not feeling a deep, agonizing guilt about something they said yesterday. They are entirely, fiercely immersed in the texture of the wood, the balance of the blocks, and the reality of the present moment. They do not feel that anything is lacking. In that profound absence of desire, their mind goes completely quiet, and a deep, intrinsic contentment naturally rises to the surface. People often assume that a neutral state, a state without intense screaming joy or intense weeping sadness, must be numb and boring. But that child is in a neutral state, and it is a state of absolute, vibrant perfection. We adults, on the other hand, spend a staggering percentage of our waking hours mentally time-traveling. We are constantly abandoning the beautiful, immediate reality right in front of our eyes to panic over the future or obsessively regret the past. This relentless mental motion completely destroys your ability to experience the world, replacing your life with a pervasive, low-level anxiety. There is a profound piece of wisdom that suggests enlightenment is not a mystical state you magically achieve after sitting on a mountain in isolation for 40 years. Enlightenment is simply the quiet space between your thoughts. If you can quiet the relentless, judging, chattering in your head for even a few moments, you can touch that enlightenment every single day. To quiet that internal chattering, you must recognize a harsh but incredibly liberating truth. The universe does not care about your feelings, and there are no external forces actively trying to make you miserable. Nature has no inherent concept of good or bad, right or wrong. Reality is entirely neutral. Imagine a massive, miles-long traffic jam on a crowded highway. Two drivers are sitting side by side in their stopped cars. The first driver is gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles are white. His blood pressure is spiking, he is furious at the delay, and he feels like the universe is actively conspiring to ruin his extremely important day. The second driver is sitting with her seat reclined, listening to a beautiful piece of classical music, watching the sunset paint the clouds, and deeply enjoying a rare moment of uninterrupted solitude. The traffic jam itself possesses no emotion. It is simply a collection of metal boxes sitting on asphalt. The first driver is actively choosing to interpret the neutral reality as a targeted catastrophe, while the second is choosing to interpret it as a sudden, beautiful gift. The world is simply a mirror, endlessly reflecting your own internal emotional state back at you. We spend our entire lives violently trying to bend the external world to match our internal preferences. We exhaust ourselves trying to change our surroundings, fix our partners, and conquer our industries, completely ignoring the fact that the world is largely fixed, and we are the ones who are highly malleable. If you can step back, recognize that you are just a fleeting creature on a rock spinning through space, and drop your massive, exhausting expectations of how the world should be, the anxiety immediately begins to drain away. You realize that you always have the power to choose peace. And when you establish a strong baseline of unshakable internal peace, happiness simply becomes the effortless byproduct of your daily existence. Chapter 7. Overcoming the Traps of Desire. There is a fundamental delusion we almost all suffer from, a quiet lie that plays on a loop in the back of our minds from the time we are old enough to form coherent thoughts. The delusion is the absolute belief that there is something out there in the external world that will finally bring us everlasting joy and fulfillment. We tell ourselves that as soon as we achieve a specific milestone, acquire a certain possession, or reach a particular status, the restlessness inside of us will finally quiet down. Think about the last time you obsessed over acquiring something new. Perhaps it was a beautiful new house, a luxury car, or a prestigious promotion at work. For months, you likely tied all of your emotional energy to that future event. You browsed forums late at night, fantasized about the day the keys would be handed to you, and convinced yourself that this specific achievement would fundamentally upgrade your baseline of happiness. But what actually happened when you finally got it? There was a brief, thrilling spike of dopamine. For a few days, or perhaps a few weeks, you felt like you had conquered the world. And then the thrill evaporated. The new car simply became the metal box you used to commute in. The massive promotion just became your normal, stressful daily routine. You adapted to the new reality, and almost immediately, your mind began searching the horizon for the next thing to crave. We are essentially survival and replication machines, biologically wired to constantly seek the next advantage. This wiring keeps us alive, but it actively destroys our peace. You must realize that every single desire you hold is essentially a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. You are voluntarily choosing a state of discontentment, pledging to remain unsatisfied until the external world bends to your will. Most people walk through their entire lives carrying dozens of these heavy contracts simultaneously, and then they genuinely wonder why they feel so heavy and miserable all the time. If you want to protect your peace, you must ruthlessly audit your desires. You cannot simply turn off all human ambition. You are a living creature meant to engage with the world and actualize your potential. But you must treat your desires as highly dangerous, expensive contracts. If you must desire something, pick just one massive, overarching goal to give your life direction and purpose. By severely limiting your desires to a single pursuit, you allow the rest of your mind to remain perfectly clear, peaceful, and anchored in the present moment. One of the most toxic desires you can harbor is the desire for another person's life. We are deeply social creatures, historically conditioned to measure our own worth by comparing ourselves to the people around us. We look at someone who is incredibly wealthy, brilliantly charismatic, or impossibly attractive, and a quiet, venomous jealousy begins to take root. We assume that because they have achieved massive external success, they must possess an untouchable, euphoric internal life. But this is a severe miscalculation of how human existence actually works. Jealousy relies on the false belief that you can cherry-pick the exact traits you want from someone else's life while keeping your own identity. You look at a highly successful business magnate and think you simply want their bank account. But you cannot just extract their wealth. If you truly want to be them, you have to be willing to execute a wholesale, 24-hour, 100% swap. You must take on their specific childhood traumas, their private neuroses, their secret addictions, and their profound, silent anxieties. You must adopt their exact self-image and their precise emotional baseline. Imagine realizing that the phenomenally wealthy person you envy is completely incapable of sitting quietly in a room by themselves because they are consumed by paranoia and the terrifying fear of losing everything they have built. If you are not willing to permanently trade your entire consciousness, your family, your memories, and your exact level of peace for theirs, then your jealousy is entirely pointless. Once you deeply internalize the reality of this total swap, envy instantly evaporates. You realize that life is ultimately a single-player game. You are born alone, You interpret all of your experiences alone, and your internal peace is a highly personal journey that has absolutely nothing to do with the scoreboard of anyone else. When you strip away the frantic desires for external validation and the poisonous habit of envy, you are still left with the friction of everyday life. You will encounter frustrating people, catastrophic business failures, and heartbreaking losses. When you are faced with any difficult situation in life, you truly only have three options. You can change it, you can leave it, or you can completely accept it. If you are in a miserable, draining career, you can actively change it by demanding new responsibilities or altering your approach. You can leave it by handing in your resignation and walking away. Or you can accept it, completely dropping your emotional resistance and viewing the job purely as a neutral transaction to fund your life. The worst possible choice, and the one that causes the vast majority of human suffering, is choosing to not change it, not leave it, and not accept it, but simply sitting around wishing it were different. That passive, grinding friction between how reality actually is and how your ego desperately wishes it to be is the root of all misery. Acceptance is incredibly difficult, but it is the ultimate super skill of a peaceful mind. To achieve profound acceptance, you must find a way to step back and look at your immediate struggles through a massive cosmic lens. You must fully embrace the reality of your own mortality. We spend massive amounts of energy trying to avoid the reality of death, constantly building monuments, companies, and legacies that we hope will outlast us. But the inescapable truth is that everything we build will eventually turn to dust. Civilizations will collapse, our planets will fade, and in the grand timescale of the universe, your entire life is nothing more than the brief, beautiful blink of a firefly in the deep night. This is not a depressing reality, it is the most liberating truth you can possibly absorb. If you fully acknowledge the absolute impermanence of everything you are doing, the heavy, suffocating pressure of life vanishes. You realize that you are simply participating in a game, and because none of the material outcomes will ultimately survive the end of time, the only thing that truly matters is how you experience the brief moments you have. When you stop demanding that the universe conform to your rigid expectations, you free yourself to laugh, to appreciate the fleeting beauty of the present, and to effortlessly accept reality exactly as it is. Chapter 8. Forging the Inner Citadel. There is a profound realization that completely shifts how you move through the world. Peace and happiness are not innate traits that you are simply born with, nor are they gifts bestowed by a fortunate universe. They are highly technical skills that you construct day by day through deliberate practice. Just as you can study the mechanics of nutrition to lose weight, or study the principles of mathematics to understand physics, you can study and manipulate the machinery of your own mind to raise your baseline of happiness. When we are children, our minds are relatively blank slates, but as we grow, we absorb a massive, tangled web of habits from our environment. We learn how to react when we are insulted, how to seek comfort when we are sad, and how to distract ourselves when we are bored. Over decades, we become nothing more than a collection of thousands of subconscious habits running on autopilot. If you feel a pervasive sense of anxiety or misery, it is highly likely that your subconscious is running a deeply ingrained script of negative habits that you never consciously chose to install. To forge an unbreakable inner citadel, you must treat your mind as a laboratory. Finding what works for you requires relentless trial and error. You might try sitting in silent meditation for a week and find it maddening, but then discover that a long, solitary walk in the woods brings you immense clarity. The specific method matters far less than the intention behind it. You must systematically audit your life, identifying the thoughtless bad habits that steal your peace and replacing them with intentional good ones. Imagine a middle-aged professional who wakes up every single morning with a heavy, unshakable sense of dread. For years, he assumed this was simply the burden of being an adult. But one day, he decides to audit his daily routines. He notices that the very first thing he does upon waking is reach for his glowing phone to read the news, instantly flooding his brain with global catastrophes and political outrage. He realizes that he spends his lunch breaks eating heavy, sugar-laden food that spikes his energy and then violently crashes his mood. And most importantly, he realizes that he spends his weekends with a group of friends who bond entirely by complaining about their jobs, their spouses, and their perceived lack of luck. He decides to systematically dismantle this architecture of misery. He stops consuming the news, realizing that its entire business model relies on making him angry and anxious. He stops eating the sugar that sends his blood sugar into a chaotic spiral. But the hardest, most vital change he makes is to his social circle. There is a biological theory that you can perfectly predict the behavior of a chimpanzee by looking at the 5 chimpanzees it spends the most time with, and humans are no different. If you surround yourself with cynics and pessimists, their worldview will inevitably become your own. Our professional slowly begins to distance himself from the friends who constantly engage in conflict, choosing instead to protect his peace. He seeks out people who are naturally optimistic, people who marvel at the simple fact that we are alive on a spinning rock rather than constantly demanding to know why the universe is not giving them more. Over a period of several years, by simply dropping his toxic habits and fiercely curating his environment, his entire emotional baseline elevates. He did not win the lottery, and his external circumstances did not dramatically change. He simply reconditioned his mind by choosing better inputs. A massive part of this reconditioning requires you to completely abandon the exhausting effort of trying to be someone else. Society constantly pressures us to conform to an accepted mold, whispering that if we mimic the behaviors, opinions, and career paths of those who are currently successful, we will eventually reach their level. But mimicry is a fool's errand. The combinatorics of human DNA and the vast, incredibly specific web of your individual life experiences make you a completely unprecedented event in the universe. Consider a young artist who spends years desperately trying to paint in the classical, highly structured style of the old masters, believing this is the only path to critical acclaim. Her work is technically proficient, but it feels hollow, and she is constantly overshadowed by painters who do it naturally. She is miserable because she is fighting her own nature. Deep down, she has always been obsessed with vibrant, chaotic, almost childlike bursts of geometric color. One day, exhausted by the effort of pretending, she throws away the classical rulebook and paints entirely from her own weird, unique intuition. The resulting artwork is entirely original. No one can compete with her on it because no one else possesses her exact internal vision. To be truly at peace, you must commit to being yourself with passionate, unapologetic intensity. When you stop trying to force yourself into a socially approved template, you free up massive amounts of cognitive energy. You finally get to listen to the quiet, authentic voice in your head that knows exactly what you genuinely want to do. However, all the mental reconditioning and authentic expression in the world will collapse if the physical vessel is neglected. To have true peace of mind, you absolutely must establish peace of body first. The hierarchy of your priorities must be completely uncompromising. Your physical health must be your ultimate priority, followed by your mental health, your spiritual health, your family's well-being, and finally your work and the rest of the world. If you lose your physical health, every single other priority on that list instantly becomes irrelevant. We are biological creatures living in a modern world that is completely misaligned with our evolutionary design. We are built to move, to endure the cold, and to face scarcity. But we live in a world of sedentary comfort, endless screens, and infinite, highly addictive calories. This abundance is an evolutionary trap. When your body encounters heavily processed food, especially lethal combinations of sugar and fat, it overrides your rational brain and demands that you consume it. If you rely on willpower in the moment of temptation, you will lose. You must structure your life to avoid the trap entirely. A highly successful executive once found herself 30 pounds overweight, constantly sick, and entirely devoid of energy. For years, she told herself the most common, insidious lie in the modern world. She simply did not have the time to exercise. But saying you do not have time is just a polite way of saying it is not a priority. When a true crisis hits, you miraculously find the time. She realized that if she continued making the easy choices, sleeping in, eating fast food, skipping the gym, her long-term life would be incredibly hard, plagued by disease and exhaustion. She embraced the profound truth that making the hard choices now is the only way to guarantee an easy life later. She made her morning workout her non-negotiable, supreme priority. It did not matter if her company was facing a massive crisis or if her inbox was overflowing. The world would simply have to wait until she was finished. She stopped obsessing over finding the perfect, scientifically optimized workout routine and simply committed to doing something physical every single day. By taking absolute, unyielding responsibility for her physical vessel, she reclaimed her energy. This is the essence of forging the inner citadel. You cannot hire a doctor to make you healthy, you cannot hire a guru to make you calm, and you cannot rely on the world to hand you a joyful existence. You must become the fierce, uncompromising architect of your own habits, your own authenticity, and your own physical vitality. Chapter 9. Strength and Self-Mastery. There is a wild, untamed machine operating inside of your head, and for the vast majority of human beings, it is running completely out of control. When we are young children, we operate mostly on pure instinct, fully immersed in the present environment. But as we grow, we develop an ego and a complex identity designed to help us navigate the world, survive, and get what we want. This survival mechanism is incredibly useful for long-term planning, but over time, it mutates into a relentless, exhausting internal monologue. If you were to walk down a crowded city street and tune into the minds of the people passing by, you would hear a deafening roar of frantic thoughts. People are constantly replaying agonizing memories from yesterday, projecting terrifying fantasies about tomorrow, and judging every single thing they see. They are completely, entirely pulled out of base reality, trapped inside the simulation of their own minds. To reclaim your life, you must realize that your mind is meant to be a highly effective servant, not a tyrannical master. You must learn to run your brain in debugging mode, carefully observing the code that is executing your emotions rather than blindly following its commands. The ultimate tool for stepping outside of your own mental software is meditation. However, society has shrouded meditation in a fog of mystical confusion, leading people to believe they need to levitate or achieve supernatural powers. The truth is far more practical. Meditation is simply intermittent fasting for the mind. Just as a body becomes heavy and sick from consuming too much processed sugar, the mind becomes heavy, sluggish, and anxious from consuming too many distractions. Imagine a fiercely competitive attorney who cannot sit still for 3 minutes without feeling a suffocating wave of anxiety. Her mind is a chaotic storm of unresolved arguments, lingering fears from her childhood, and endless to-do lists. She decides to try a brutal, uncompromising experiment. She will sit in a silent room, completely alone, with her eyes closed, for 1 hour every single day. She resolves to make no effort whatsoever. She will not fight her thoughts, and she will not embrace them. She will simply sit and observe them. During the first week, it is sheer torture. Her brain screams at her to get up, to check her phone, to do something productive, but she forces herself to remain still. As she watches the chaos, she realizes something profound. Her mind is like a giant, overflowing inbox of unanswered emails. For her entire life, experiences have happened to her. She processed most of them, but the difficult ones, the rejections, the deep embarrassments, the quiet fears, got stuck to her like barnacles. Because she was always running, she never gave herself the time to process them. As she sits there day after day, these unresolved issues begin to bubble to the surface. She is forced to look at them, but because she is simply sitting and observing, she no longer reacts. She looks at a painful memory from 10 years ago, realizes it can no longer hurt her, and watches it dissolve. Over several months, she slowly clears the backlog of her mental inbox. One morning, she sits down, closes her eyes, and realizes there is absolutely nothing pressing on her mind. She has hit mental inbox 0. In that empty space, she experiences a wave of pure, unadulterated bliss and unshakable peace. She has successfully separated her core awareness from the frantic, chattering monkey mind that previously controlled her life. Once you begin to observe your mind, you realize how much of your suffering is entirely self-inflicted through the act of avoidance. We spend immense amounts of energy tiptoeing around our fears, trying to negotiate with our discomfort. Consider a man who decides to build his mental toughness by taking freezing cold showers every morning. For the first few weeks, the routine is agonizing. He stands outside the stream of water, shivering, wincing, and mentally dreading the shock before it even touches his skin. His mind screams that the cold is a terrible, unbearable threat. But one morning, he decides to stop negotiating. He turns the handle to the coldest setting and walks directly into the water without a single second of hesitation. The shock hits him, but he immediately focuses on his breath. The breath is the magical bridge between the autonomic nervous system and the voluntary nervous system. By forcing his breathing to remain slow and relaxed, he overrides the panic signals his body is sending to his brain. He realizes that the physical sensation of the cold is entirely different from the mental suffering of the cold. The suffering did not come from the water. The suffering came entirely from his mind anticipating and avoiding the water. Once he accepts the reality of the cold, the mental agony vanishes. He learns that he can conquer almost any massive obstacle in life simply by walking straight into it and controlling his breath. This level of self-mastery requires you to embrace the unglamorous, grinding reality of continuous self-improvement. The greatest superpower a human being can possess is the ability to change their own behavior. But genuine change does not come from waiting for sudden motivation, and it certainly does not come from setting vague, distant goals. Setting a goal often gives you a false sense of accomplishment, while simultaneously providing an excuse to procrastinate. You must abandon the fantasy of goals and instead focus entirely on building unbreakable systems. Think of a young entrepreneur desperately trying to build a massive technology company. He sets a goal to make $1 million in 3 years. He stares at that distant, intimidating number and constantly feels like a failure because he is so far away from it. His motivation wildly fluctuates and he burns out quickly. Eventually, he abandons the goal entirely and changes his approach. He builds a system. His new system demands that he spend exactly 2 hours every single morning writing code and 1 hour every afternoon talking directly to a potential customer. It does not matter if he feels inspired, tired, or defeated. He simply executes the system. By removing the emotional weight of a massive goal and focusing entirely on the daily inputs, he creates an environment where success becomes a statistical inevitability. He learns the ultimate law of growth. You must be absolutely, ruthlessly impatient with your daily actions, but you must be infinitely patient with your results. When you feel a burst of inspiration, you must act on it with terrifying speed. But once the action is taken, you must step back and allow the complex systems of the world to slowly align. When you sit in silence and confront the darkest corners of your own mind, you stop running from your shadows. When you stop avoiding discomfort and deliberately walk into the freezing water of your fears, you strip away the illusion that the world can break you. And when you stop obsessing over distant fantasies and anchor yourself to the relentless execution of daily systems, you forge an inner citadel that cannot be breached by the chaos of the outside world. You stop being a passive victim of your own biological programming, and you finally become the sovereign architect of your own mind. Chapter 10: Ultimate Freedom and the Present. When we first set out on the journey of life, our ultimate goal is usually a very specific kind of freedom. We crave the freedom to do whatever we want, whenever we want, with whomever we want. We chase money, build businesses, and acquire leverage because we believe these are the keys that will unlock the door to absolute autonomy. But as you navigate the complexities of the world and finally achieve a measure of external success, your definition of freedom begins to profoundly shift. You realize that having the vast resources to do anything does not necessarily bring you peace. True, ultimate freedom is not the freedom to do things, it is the freedom from things. It is the freedom from uncontrolled emotional reactions, freedom from the heavy weight of other people's expectations, and freedom from the constant, exhausting chatter of your own mind. Imagine a brilliant, highly driven founder who has spent a decade building a successful enterprise. For years, she operated on pure adrenaline and anger, using perceived slights from competitors and critics as fuel to push herself harder. She achieved her financial goals, but she felt physically toxic and constantly on edge. One day, she realizes that anger is nothing more than a burning coal she is holding tightly in her own hand, waiting to throw it at someone else. She is only burning herself. She decides to radically redefine her core values. She cuts ties with toxic partners, refuses to engage in zero-sum status games, and commits to absolute honesty, refusing to be in any room where she cannot speak her exact truth. By establishing these uncompromising, peer-based relationships and rejecting hierarchical struggles, she frees herself from the emotional chaos that once dominated her life. But even if you free your mind and clarify your values, you will inevitably face the most daunting, terrifying question of human existence. What is the actual meaning and purpose of life? People search for this answer in ancient texts, atop mountains, and in the halls of academia. But the stark, liberating truth is that there is no intrinsic universal meaning. In the grand timeline of the cosmos, the universe has existed for billions of years before you, and it will exist for billions of years after you are gone. Eventually, everything we build, our greatest monuments, our most revolutionary technologies, and our entire civilization will fade into dust as the universe marches toward its inevitable end. We are simply tiny organisms, locally reversing entropy for a brief moment in time, while globally accelerating it. This realization can feel paralyzing at first, but it is actually the ultimate permission slip to be happy. Think of an artist standing on the edge of a shoreline, spending hours constructing an intricately detailed, towering castle out of the wet sand. He knows with absolute certainty that the tide will eventually roll in and wash the entire structure away. The ocean will leave no trace of his immense effort, but he builds it anyway, not for the legacy, but purely for the joy of the creation itself. Life is exactly like writing on water, or building houses of sand. Because there is no permanent, external meaning handed down from above, you are entirely free to create your own. You get to decide what game you want to play, who you want to love, and what brings you authentic joy. To navigate this deeply personal journey, you must build a philosophy that bridges the physical reality of the world with the spiritual reality of your mind. You can embrace the profound, time-tested practices of ancient wisdom, like mindfulness, silent observation, and the dissolution of the ego, without having to blindly accept fanciful myths or unprovable superstitions. You can fully acknowledge the brutal scientific reality of human evolution, recognizing that we are biologically wired as survival and replication machines, while simultaneously doing the deep internal work required to transcend those base animal instincts. You test everything, remain fiercely skeptical, keep the practices that tangibly improve your daily peace, and discard the rest. When you shed your delusions, clarify your personal values, and accept the impermanence of the universe, you arrive at the final, ultimate truth. The present moment is the only thing that actually exists. The past is nothing more than a fading fictional tape playing in your memory, and the future is an imaginary landscape that you can never actually touch. Death is simply the point where there are no more future moments. You are dying and being reborn in every single fraction of a second. The entire journey, from understanding the mechanics of wealth to mastering the leverage of the modern world to taming the chaotic monkey mind, has all been leading to this single point. It has all been an effort to clear the brush, to remove the anxieties and the financial panics so that you can finally stand still. Your life is a brief, breathtakingly beautiful spark in the infinite dark. Do not waste it living in the ghosts of yesterday or the phantoms of tomorrow. Step fully into the light of the present, build your sandcastles with a joyful heart, and experience the ultimate freedom of simply being alive.